Hello, everyone. Welcome you to the Asian American Scholar Forum, AASF, webinar in October. My name is Xiaodong Zhang, a member of the AASF. I'm also a professor of computer science and engineering at The Ohio State University. On September 23rd, AASF released a report showing a growing number of Chinese descent scholars have left or are considering leaving the US to take positions in foreign countries. In addition, they are also avoiding federal grant applications. The Wall Street Journal and other major media reported the study quickly. This is the focus topic in today's webinar. The moderator of the webinar is Professor Yashon Huang, who is an endowed chair professor in global economics and management at Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Yashon is also the president of AASF. AASF would like to take this opportunity to make an announcement before the webinar. The announcement will be made by Yashon and the vice president of AASF, Kai Li. Since I have introduced Yashon several times and in other webinars, I'd like to say a few words about Kai. Kai is an endowed chair professor of computer science at Princeton University. Kai is a pioneer in multiple computing fields. The advancement of several core computing technologies that we're using today in high-performance computing, software systems, and storage can be traced back to the root of Kai's original research. Kai is also an outstanding educator. He has supervised a long list of PhD graduates who become distinguished leaders in both academia and industries. Kai is a member of US National Academy of Engineering. Yashon and Kai, I give the floor to you.
Thank you, Xiaodong. We at AASF are extremely happy to announce that Gisela Harris Kusakawa will be the first executive director to lead our organization. And Gisela is on the screen. And to lead our organization for Asian American scientists, researchers, and scholars across the country. AASF endeavors to protect the rights of Asian Americans and immigrants and promote academic belonging, openness, freedom, and equality for all. Gisela was most recently the director of the Anti-Profiling Civil Rights and National Security Program at Asian Americans Advancing Justice, AAJC, and where she established their first national security and civil rights program and acted as the supervising attorney for legal referrals. Gisela's successes include spearheading coalition work to end the US Department of Justice's China Initiative. She is deeply involved in the Asian American community, serving on multiple boards and bar associations. Gisela is a strategic leader in the advocacy space, and we are thrilled to have her to take the helm at AASF at this important juncture for our communities. Thank you, Gisela. All of us are looking forward to working with you. Now I'm going to kindly ask you to introduce Representative Judy Chu.
Thank you so much, Professor Yashon Huang. It's my honor and privilege to welcome everyone and also to serve and lead AASF during this time of great need. I stand on the shoulders of the many leaders and academics before me who remain resilient and work towards empowering our community, starting with establishing AASF as a civil rights nonprofit that can protect and advance the rights of Asian Americans and immigrants. that can foster the future leaders in science, technology, academia, and public service, that can combine the tremendous expertise of our Asian American scientific and academic community with the legal and civil rights community. I'll work to bridge these communities with many of my colleagues here, build solidarity within the Asian American community and beyond, and grow ASF's relationships with supporters and stakeholders. For far too long, Asian Americans and immigrants have been treated as threats and subjected to heightened scrutiny whenever the US has rising tensions with an Asian country. And we are seeing that play out today. AASF was founded last year when MIT professor Dr. Gang Chen was among a number of Chinese American scientists and scholars in US universities who was subjected to heightened scrutiny or targeted by the federal government. ASF is here to let you know that you are not alone, that we have worked to build this community behind you, working together in coalition with others to fight for justice and help provide you all with support and commonsensical solutions to many of these problems. The irony is that the very communities that ASF serves, who are most impacted by profiling, discrimination, and heightened scrutiny, are also the very people our country needs the most. In this room alone, we have talents that have shaped the internet as we know it, conducted crucial research on COVID-19, and advanced our social sciences and STEM fields in our country. We ask our leaders in our country to work with our communities to welcome the best minds in the world and build up Asian American leadership, to shift away from ineffective prosecution strategies towards efforts to attract talent to the US, and to live up to the ideals and values that drew so many of us here today to this country, including myself, that we now call home. So welcome again, everyone. And I hope that you all take something away from today's discussion, starting with our esteemed keynote speaker, KPAC Chair Judy Chu. It's my honor to be able to introduce the tremendous accomplishments that KPAC Chair Chu has done, and also the tremendous support that she has given to the Asian American and immigrant community. KPAC Chair Chu was elected to the US House of Representatives representing the 27th Congressional District. She is the first Chinese American woman elected to Congress in history and is a crucial leader in Congress combating racial profiling and discrimination of Asian Americans and immigrants, including the efforts to end the China Initiative. KPAC Chair Chu, thank you so much for your public service. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm Congressmember Judy Chu from California's 27th District. And as the chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus, or what we call KPAC, I'm thrilled to be here today with the Asian American Scholar Forum for this incredibly important webinar. Let me start by congratulating Gisela Kusakawa, AASF's first ever executive director. It's so meaningful to have groups like AASF speaking up for the Asian American community, because Asian American scientists and engineers have been at the forefront of some of the most important developments in our country. Starting in the mid-2010s, though, I began to hear about the racial profiling of Chinese American scientists in economic espionage and academic integrity cases, whose lives were ruined by accusations. And until just a few months ago, these prejudices were being perpetuated and led by our own government due to the China Initiative. The China Initiative was a Trump-era Department of Justice program aimed at countering espionage in our universities, but was really just an exercise in racial profiling. Family ties to China or professionally encouraged research and collaboration could be enough to trigger a full investigation. And in fact, this initiative stood out as one of the only Department of Justice efforts named for a specific country. The reality of this policy had grave consequences for the way these investigations played out, with chilling effects for both the Chinese American community and our country as a whole. It was clear that the China Initiative prioritized convictions, not justice. And too often that meant bringing a case without sufficient grounds, something that has upended the lives of people like Dr. An Ming Hu, who was the first case to be brought under trial under the China Initiative and was fully acquitted of all charges, a story you all know well. I am glad that Dr. Hu was cleared, but the damage has been done and is irreversible. And stories such as Dr. Hu's are ones that many Chinese American scientists are all too familiar with and fear daily might happen to them. Additionally, these investigations have led many young Chinese Americans to decide against careers in science out of fear that they too will be investigated or worse. And as we continue to combat the rise in anti-Asian hate and violence, profiling cases have injected even more terror and anxiety into our communities. One thing became clear: being accused of leaving out information on a grant application led to far too much terror for researchers, some of whom were arrested for it. Yet there was no consistency in what was required. And so we in CAPAC submitted our suggestions for change and were gratified to have these accepted by the White House Office on Science and Technology in their new guidelines. We were also adamant in pushing to end the China Initiative. We wrote letters, spoke out at all opportunities, met with Attorney General Merrick Garland, and raised this issue with White House officials. Thanks to all those efforts, and thanks to the tireless advocacy of groups like AASF, the Biden administration terminated the program earlier this year. This move was long overdue and is the first step of many in addressing the injustices and lasting damages thrust upon the Chinese American scientific community in just a matter of years. As chair of CAPAC, I've been working closely to ensure that Asian American communities, in particular Chinese American scientists, have a seat at the table as we work to ensure that racial profiling at the hands of our own government does not happen like this again. And in fact, that seat at the table caused us to be there at a very crucial time as Congress considered the CHIPS and Science Act, legislation aimed at boosting American competitiveness and innovation. CAPAC identified 4 specific areas in the legislative text that would have proven incredibly harmful for Chinese American scientists and could have resulted in widespread profiling of individuals in our communities. Thanks to the work of many community partners, including AASF, we were able to push back strongly and ensure that ultimately these provisions were not included in the final bill that became law. We continue seeing attempts to attach these harmful provisions to other bills, but I can assure you that we will fight back and we will ensure that in working with our House and Senate leadership, that bolstering our nation's competitiveness will not come at the expense of the civil rights of Asian Americans. CAPAC was only able to deliver these wins for Asian American communities and Chinese American scientists across the nation because of the work of organizations like AASF, like with your new report, Caught in the Crossfire, which provides so much needed data on the fears that Chinese American scientists in this country face. I was stunned to see that 61% of the respondents in the study felt pressure to leave the US and that 42% were fearful of conducting research in the US. These numbers are staggering, and they show that unfortunately our work is far from over. Despite genuine national security and espionage concerns related to the Chinese government, we must ensure that any response from our federal government does not hinder or restrict legitimate international academic cooperation and collaboration, or impinge on the civil rights of Asian Americans through racial profiling. And the work you all do is critical to meeting that goal. So I thank you again for the invitation to speak with you today, and I look forward to much more future collaboration between CAPAC and AASF in service of the AAPI community.
Thank you so much, Representative Judy Chu. It is no understatement to just say how much of an inspiration you are to our communities and such an example of the difference it makes when we do have a seat at the table. Thank you for being such a strong voice. And thank you for taking the time to speak directly to the communities most impacted. I'll pass on to my colleague, Yashon Huang, the president of AASF.
Thank you, Chairwoman Judy Chu. Your leadership has always been vital, important to our community, and your vision is incredibly inspiring. The point you made about the importance of being at the table is so right. In the area of science and technology, a lot of the provisions that may not appear to be harmful to people who don't understand science and technology, who don't understand academia, can be incredibly harmful to our community. So we look forward to future opportunities to work with you on these policy issues. Thank you so much. So next, we are going to transition to the next phase of our program. And we're going to have first the presentations from my colleagues at AASF, and then we're going to have panelists from OSCP and AAU to share their perspectives on these issues. Let me introduce two of my colleagues at AASF. I'm going to be very brief because I want to leave time for their presentation. Professor Yu Xie. Professor Xie is professor of sociology at Princeton University. And then we're also going to have presentation by Xihong Lin. Xihong is a professor of biostatistics at Harvard. Please take over, Professor Xie. Professor Xie, your mic is muted.
Okay. Oh, gee, stop sharing. Thanks, Yashon, for chairing today's session. And before we discuss the report, let me give you a broad historical context. Something we're very familiar today, the high representation of Asian Americans in American science and technology, was not true prior to the 1960s. So this is still typical. There's a lot of Asian Americans in American science and technology, but they were not there before the 1960s, before the Civil Rights Movement and the 1968 Immigration Act. It's a recent phenomenon. Second, the rise of science in China is a recent phenomenon as well. It came about after long decades of economic reform, and the rise of China, actually, rise of science in China came only after 1990s to catch up with the US. The conclusion is that for many complicated social, economic, and political reasons, many Chinese-born Chinese and US-born Chinese Americans today excel in science and constitute a significant part of American science. I will come back to that point later in the next slide. The US leadership in science and technology since the 1920s has remained strong. And this is a conclusion that we draw, me and my colleague, Sasha Kilowat, another sociologist at Harvard. We wrote the book, Is American Science in Decline? We draw the conclusion after analyzing a lot of data on American science. We have two reasons for our optimism. One, America is very open. American science is open. Second, American science has benefited and is benefiting from immigration. For example, Asians account for 24% of NIH R1 PIs. 46 of US PhDs in science technology were given to international students. The biggest group of foreign students receiving PhDs in the US in science technology came from China. For recent data, it's almost 40%. And most of those PhDs from China in science and technology stay in the US after their PhDs. So the immigration of scientists from China has contributed to the health of American science. However, as Representative Judy Chu said, the China initiative launched by the Trump administration in 2018 changed that. Today, Chinese origin research faculty in the US now feel pressure and consider leaving the US and avoid applying for federal grants. And the rest of the session, we're going to present the data from our research on those topics. Let me just show you a chart in the stream of return migration of Chinese origin scientists who have left the US to China in the last more than decades. So the chart gives you in two panels. In panel A, we show trends in returning scientists from the US and to China of relatively junior scholars. In the lower panel B, we see the trends for senior established scholars. And you see three lines. The first top blue is engineering and computer science. Green is for mathematics and physical science. And yellow or orange is for life sciences. And one is normalized to be the baseline in 2010. And the trend represents a change from the baseline. So for recent years, 2021, for example, the latest, we see a figure of more than five times in some fields, especially for the junior scholars, compared to the baseline 2010. So in short, across all three fields, you see a steady increase of the return, the migration of Chinese origin scientists from US to China. This is based on institutional affiliations in published scientific papers. We track the affiliations of same scientists. They change from US institutions to Chinese institutions. It's a proxy for measuring the flow of migration from American science to Chinese science. And that trend has increased over time and picked up the speed in more recent years. And you especially see an increase in engineering and computer science. And that is the area of sensitive technology, an important area for the US. And we see an increase of that trend. So we're losing talent to China for a while, but particularly after the China initiative. I will stop there and I will have my colleague Xihong Lin to take it over.
Thank you, Yu. And I will share the funding of the AASF, a National Academic Climate Survey. So this survey was done in December 2021 to March 2022. So as you can see, the samples was quite representative across the US, except for a few small number of states. We had responses from almost every single state. And also it has a good representations of the permanent residents and also naturalized citizens. And also has a good representation across many different science and technology field, and also has a good coverage of both public university and private university, and also has good coverage across all the rank of faculty, from assistant professor to a full professor. So the analysis was performed for about 1,300 Chinese origin faculties. So here there are 6 major takeaways and from the findings. First, there is a widespread fears. So in particular, as you can see, 35% of the respondents felt unwelcome in US, and 72% felt unsafe, and about 42% felt fearful of conducting research. So who felt more fearful of conducting research? And so for those 42% of people, and then the analysis showed that life scientists and CS and engineering faculty and the senior faculty, they are twice more fearful and compared to the reference. The second takeaway is more on the positive side. And a vast majority, almost 90% of the participants would like to contribute to science and technologies. So however, in the last few years, there has been several major challenges. And so that brings to the third takeaway point. And so in particular, about 86% of the faculty felt it harder to recruit international students. So that presents significant challenges in attracting talents. To support this, and so here is the number of the student visa issued to the Chinese national, and in 2019 and 2020, as you can see, the reduction is about 52% as reported by Wall Street Journal. So this support our survey funding as well. So takeaway number 4 is there is a significant risk of losing talent in US. In particular, the survey showed 61% of the faculty felt the pressure of leaving US. So who are they? And the analysis showed the junior faculty is about 1.7 times more likely considering leaving US. So then that means there is a significant risk of losing young talent. And also grant awardees and of the federal agencies, they are more likely consider leaving US, about 1.5%. And there's a second type of losing talent. In particular, there is a significant risk of losing talent in federal sponsored research. In particular, 45% of the respondents intended to avoid applying for federal grant. So who are they? And it turns out the analysis showed on the CS and engineering faculties and the senior faculty and faculty from public institution, they were more likely to consider avoiding federal grant. So for example, senior faculty is about 2 times more likely compared to the junior faculty avoiding applying for grant. And also CS and engineering faculty, and they are about 1.6 times likely avoiding applying for grant. And so those CS engineering faculties, they are more likely to get funding from the industry. And so that means that this will affect open science. So now let's connecting dots. So what are the causes of the losing talent? So the analysis showed that fear strongly predicts the intention of relocating abroad and also avoiding federal grant application. So in particular, faculty who were more fearful were more likely to consider moving abroad. That is 1.7 times more likely. And also they are 4 times more likely to avoid applying for grant because of fear. And also this association are highly statistically significant with a very, very small p-value, less than 10⁻3. And so the earlier result showed that the CS and engineering faculty, they were more likely to avoid applying for grant, and also they were more fearful. And then how can we address this issue? So the analysis further showed that after accounting for fears, and the CS and engineering faculty were not statistically significant in avoiding applying for grant compared to the others. So basically, the reason the CS and engineering faculty, they intended to avoid applying for grant is due to fear. So if the fear can be addressed, and then CS and engineering faculty were more likely to applying for federal grant. So to summarize, the vast majority would like to contribute to the US leadership in science and technology, but they felt unsafe or unwelcome in staying. There was a wide spread of fears conducting research and the normal academic activities as shown in the survey. And the survey also showed there is a high risk of losing talent of Chinese origin faculties, especially young faculty and grant awardees. So that means we are at high risk of losing young talent. And also there is a high risk of losing talent in federal sponsored research. This will affect open science, especially the CS and engineering faculties, and also senior faculties, and also faculty from public institutions. And so by connecting dots, and the result showed the fears play a major role in predicting the intention of moving and also avoiding federal grant application. So how to move forward? And so first, addressing fears and making the academic environment welcoming and attractive for all will help retain and attract scientific talent and strengthen the US leadership in science and technology. So how can we do that? It really takes a village. So it would be great to engage all stakeholders in the dialogue at the table and jointly developing and implementing policies. So the stakeholder will include federal agencies, universities, organizations, and also Asian American community. Thank you.
Thank you, Xihong. Thank you, Yu. I think this is really powerful research. It shows just how dramatic the effect has been. And I want to sort of build on a comment that you made at the very beginning. The US benefited tremendously from immigration of global talents. This is actually true of many other countries as well. Israel benefited from the influx of Russian scientists in the 1970s. The US benefited during the Second World War from influx of German scientists into the United States. And so if we don't keep in mind how country builds its economy, builds its technology on the basis of global talents, we're at the risk of losing the leadership. Let me take the last bullet point by Xihong and then transition to our two next panelists. It takes a village to repair the damage. And let me ask our two panelists, Christina Eller, who is Assistant Director of Evidence and Policy, White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Thank you so much, Christina, for joining our webinar. And then we have Toby Smith, who is Senior Vice President for Science Policy and Global Affairs, Association of American Universities. Thank you, Toby, for joining our webinar. Let me go to Christina first and then Toby second to hear your reactions, your perspectives on this incredibly important issue. Christina.
Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. Thank you so much for the incredible work on this report. And thank you so much for being a source of bringing all of these community stakeholders in all of our different roles to the table, because it's truly by having these discussions that we can start to together address this culture of fear that you cite. So I just would like to take a few minutes to give a brief round of remarks, and then I'd be very, very happy as part of the discussion to chime in wherever I'm helpful. I first just want to thank Professors Lin and Xia for putting together this incredible presentation, for the work of all of the co-authors on the new report, for really showing us with data, with quantification, patterns that we all have been discussing for some time. As you know, it's so powerful to be able to have that data-driven viewpoint because it gives us something all to stand on. We've talked a lot about evidence-based policy and how important it is, and these are the sorts of data sources and analytical tools that help us to get there. So just my deep thanks for that. I will just say that from the perspective of our office here at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, we truly do believe that one of America's greatest strengths is its scientific and technological innovation, which is fueled in large part by engagement from and participation in the U.S. scientific enterprise by talented scientists and engineers from around the world. What we have learned from the discussion today already, however, is that the policies of the U.S. government can have very direct impacts on the health and well-being of this dynamic ecosystem, both in very beneficial and sometimes in difficult ways. This is why the Biden-Harris administration is truly taking a thoughtful, community-engaged, and values-driven approach to implementing research security policies and practices across the federal government and beyond. As many of you perhaps know, my office, OSTP, plays a leadership role in developing and implementing our research security policies, most of which are captured in National Security Presidential Memorandum, or NSPM 33, and now new policies are coming from the recently passed CHIPS and Science Act. Aligning with direction from the Biden-Harris administration, we are leading this work in ways that hope to protect research security and maintain the core values behind America's scientific leadership, which include, and we say this at every research security subcommittee meeting, they include integrity, openness, transparency, honesty, equity, fair competition, objectivity, and democracy. It certainly continues to be the case that we have to take research security challenges with care, with serious attention, especially if we want to facilitate the trust and openness that is at the heart of the American research enterprise. But, and I know many of you have heard me say this, but I have to say it again, if our policies to address the challenges posed in relation to research security divert us from our core values or fuel xenophobia or prejudice of any kind, then we will significantly diminish our ability to attract and retain scientific talent or to facilitate productive international collaborations. As we've talked about today already, these kinds of, and as Congressmember Judy Chu said, we have to encourage these international collaborations in ways that are clear, that are transparent, and that are at the heart of fueling our S&T enterprise. So with that set of values in mind, we keep on working inside OSTP and with our partners across federal agencies to develop and execute on research security policies in ways that reflect three key principles. One, to protect America's security and openness. Two, to be clear so that researchers can easily and properly comply. And three, to ensure that our policies are non-discriminatory, that they do not fuel xenophobia or prejudice. This, we think, is really essential to restoring trust. I want to elaborate on that third point just for a moment and to say it's not just that we have to ensure that our policies do not fuel xenophobia or prejudice. It's that we have to proactively affirm that Asian Americans, Native Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders, and people from all national origins play an integral role in this country. More broadly, as we attend to our research security policies, we have to return to and affirm our core values at every opportunity, as today's discussion will allow us to do, while also acknowledging that we have a lot of work to do still to restore the trust that is so imperative to a flourishing S&T environment in the United States and around the world. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you. Toby?
Thank you. I want to start by thanking the Asian American Scholars Forum for this webinar and again, the work that's been done on this report. We all know, and it's been mentioned, that U.S. leadership in science and technology has for a long time depended on attracting and retaining the best and brightest students and scholars from around the world. Certainly the universities I represent, which are 63 leading U.S. research universities, recognize that, and that if we're to continue our leadership, we must continue to attract that talent. That's why the issues that you have raised in this report are of such concern. It is really troubling to hear that we have faculty on our campuses who are fearful of conducting research and that they're scared of applying for federal research funding, that they are shying away from the very international collaborations we know drive science forward. And in some instances that they are even leaving the country to go elsewhere. At the same time, we have to make sure our policies are welcoming so we can continue to attract that flow of talent to the United States that has driven our innovation system forward and kept us in the lead in the past. And we ought to avoid putting in roadblocks that hurt instead of help us to keep us in front in an area where we clearly had the advantage. And that has been our ability based upon our value system and what we believe here in the US as being important. That has really put us in the lead in the past. So I think the report and some other reports that we've seen have generated some concerns on our campuses, so much so that back in September, we had a meeting of our vice presidents for research and actually had invited Stephen Pai and Jeremy Wu from the co-chairs of the Asian Pacific Americans for Justice group that was created, I think, under KPAC to address these issues and look at some of these cases, to come and talk with our vice presidents for research who had raised this and flagged it as an issue they were concerned about. And let's face it, there have certainly been government policies that, in the China Initiative, which I think have created perhaps some of these challenges and concerns in the fear we see. But as universities, we need to get it right too. And so what we've started is a positive dialogue amongst our folks, amongst the leaders of research on our campuses, but we've also engaged our presidents and chancellors and our provosts in this discussion. It's going to be really important that we work together on this set of issues. And we certainly appreciate the work that OSTP and Christina has been leading, and her colleagues, to really get this right. I'm not sure that we've done it as well as we ought to have. And I think one thing that I think we really need to work on together is how we make sure the policies we have in place are, whether they're federal policies or university policies, are clear, transparent, and that there are due process for faculty, as well as how we engage with the government when there are issues of concern about disclosure, and that we set the punishment appropriate to the crime. And I don't think we've gotten that totally right here in the past few years. And we want to work with the Asian American Scholars Forum, other Asian American groups, OSTP, federal research agencies to work on getting this right, because we need to protect and ensure that we continue to attract that talent, which has proven so valuable to our universities and the research we do as a country. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Christina. Now we transition to the Q&A. Let me just add that the policies have both intended and unintended consequences. And sometimes we can think about how to address intended consequences. On the unintended consequences, I would urge Christina and Toby to think of our organization as a potential source of input, and because there's an added complication that many of us grew up in a different culture, different system, different values, and things like that. So sometimes the policy may not be perceived in the same way because of these cultural differences. So we will be very happy to work with you on some of these issues. First of all, we appreciate and applaud the Biden administration for ending the China Initiative and broadly speaking, for speaking up on behalf of Asian American communities. So we greatly appreciate that. But Christina, as you have heard from Xihong and from Yu, there's a psychological lingering fear factor. So the issue for the government and maybe for the AAU as well is how do we repair the damage that has been created? To have some 40% of our faculty not willing to apply for federal grant, that's just not a very good situation. So how do we repair that situation, that problem? Christina?
Thank you very much for the question. Yeah, I'm happy to chime in first, and then I would very much welcome Toby's thoughts and insights as well. One of the major tools that we have at our disposal as members of the Executive Office of the President and the Office of Science and Technology Policy in particular, as with all other EOP components, is a coordinating function. So part of our job here at OSTP is to create structures so that different federal agencies can come together and create policy together. It was through that structure, which we call the National Science and Technology Council again, that the initial NSPM 33 policy came together. It was through that structure that the implementation guidance came out. And it's now through that structure that we are thinking very carefully about living up to the challenges of standardizing our research enterprise when it comes to applying for federal R&D funding, when it comes to being transparent, when it comes to engaging with the community, and so on and so forth. It has not always been the case that we have had standardized, transparent policies, and that is really a difficult thing when it comes to building trust, because if you don't know what kinds of policies any given agency is putting out, it's really hard to feel like you're in good hands, especially when you're sharing your own data, your information. And so through our standardized disclosure process, in particular, we're trying to get to that standardization which enables transparency and also enables equity. I will say too that as part of that process, we have been working closely with our colleagues in security agencies. It's not just the federal science agencies that are doing this work in the Biden-Harris administration. We sit down at the table all the time with our colleagues from FBI and DOJ. Some of you may have been on our community briefing on Friday, and I'll just note that as part of the participant list, we had many colleagues joining us from federal agencies security agencies in particular, because we're working really hard to give them opportunities to kind of come up to speed with how the science agencies are thinking about building trust. I think if my national security colleagues were on the line, they would also say that this is a very different policy moment following the change, repeal of the China Initiative, and that we are at this point really working hard to making sure that, as Toby said, consequences for violations are commensurate to the violation itself, and that we are being really thoughtful, and that extends across whole of federal government. We do have to be in conversation. We have to have more and more conversations. We have to open opportunities for input like we have with the standardized disclosure formats. That comment period is open until October 31st. So please, please give us your comments on those standardized disclosure forms. We really need your feedback in order to get better. There are many more things to say, but I'll leave it at that because I'd be curious to hear what Toby has to say.
Toby, many universities have been also an important player in this, right? How do you work with universities to address this problem?
Well, I want to say to the last question, I think the first thing is we all need to make the rules clear, transparent, and consistent. And I don't think that was always the case under, previously. I think some of our universities were confused about what the rules were. And if that happens, we can't make those rules clear to our faculty. That caused misunderstandings, mistakes. Yes, in a few instances, there were people who maybe knowingly didn't take certain steps or disclose information. It's the very small number. And so the issue going forward is how do we make sure, as the OSTP works on and has really put in a lot of effort to develop consistent rules, how do we and our universities are going to have to work to make sure the faculty understand the rules that the universities, as the federal recipients of the grant funds, have to abide by, and that those are clear, and that might help explain some of the questions that flow down to the faculty about why they have to disclose certain information. But I'm not sure we've done a great job at making that at all transparent, and it gets to the trust issue. So what we really need to do is talk together, and that starts at a campus by campus level, and engage all of our faculty in understanding these changes and what they will mean and how that will play out in terms of what the requirements will be, and to help our faculty make sure they are in compliance with any federal requirements.
There are many questions that coming through the chat box. Let me ask two together. One is from Dennis Simon, who is a scholar of Chinese science and technology. He asked, how do we avoid a war with China on brain drain? Because China is also trying to attract talents, and US is also doing the same. There's another question, which is about the recent policy of banning American citizens working for semiconductor companies in China. The question here is it possible that in the future that restriction is going to be extended to the students and Chinese students working on semiconductors?
Thank you. These are both very, very good questions. How can we prevent a war with China? I think one of the, on brain drain, let's not talk about other kinds of wars, let's just not go there. I think that one of the things we've been really trying quite hard to do inside the federal government, as we've talked as a community on these issues, is to think hard about basic fundamental research, and really understanding that basic fundamental research is in some ways a protected class, if you will, of our research enterprise. It's where the collaboration, the sharing of ideas, the open dialogue is both perhaps most vital and also perhaps least threatening. So I think we could do I think we need to do a much better job of talking about that basic fundamental research space as hallowed space for collaboration, and to use that in order to make progress in a way that it's collaborative. So please know that those conversations are ongoing, and that, again, the kinds of inputs that all of you from your vast knowledge bases might be able to provide us with inside USG is very invaluable. For that reason, we have this research security mailbox that we check really regularly, researchsecurity@ostp.eop.gov. I know it just feels like sending information into a void sometimes when you have these generic mailboxes, but because of various federal regulations on how we can communicate with the public, these mailboxes are what we have to hear from you. And so truly encourage your ideas, your engagement, your thoughts on this difficult set of issues at any point. Semiconductors. Yes, this has been a large topic of conversation since the policy directive came down. It's an evolving and dynamic policy framework that we're living in right now. To my knowledge, there have not been discussions about extensions into fundamental basic research or to students. This is a question that I would need to talk to my colleagues who operate on the high side much more regularly than I do. That's a fun word to mean in privacy protected spaces inside USG, because it truly is essential to ensure that we understand what the policy parameters are, why we have them, how they exist, and how they're going to impact our scientific community. I think that we have a lot of work to do when it comes to translating the policy that has come on the industry side and understanding the implications for our fundamental basic research. Right now, I do not see any crossover happening.
So I know Christina has a hard stop at 4. Some of us can go on maybe to 4:15, but I don't know, Toby, if you also have a hard stop at 4, and if you do, I like to invite you to give some reactions.
Yeah, I can stay a little bit longer, but let me just give a reaction on that. First of all, I think one area where we really need to work on is promoting immigration policies that not only help us to encourage the best and brightest to come here, but that we figure out how to help to encourage them and allow them to stay. And this is something we need to work with the Asian American community. I think our universities have been promoting this, pushing for this. I know the administration has also been pushing for it. I think it's critical. On the semiconductor piece, I draw people's attention to a talk that was a speech that was given by Jake Sullivan a few weeks ago that talked about the importance of investing in research, but it also talked about the importance of talent. Then it went on and talked about these issues with supply chain. I think one positive thing about the policy is they did not talk about deemed exports as being a part of that policy. And they didn't, as Christina mentioned, talk about anything related to fundamental research. So students, I think if you look at the what's been laid out by the policy, I think they're specifically trying to protect and recognize the value of the students and the scholars coming here. And if they're contributing to our research, that we have to protect that, wall that off from the transfer of actual exports related to semiconductors. So I hope we can continue to maintain that. That's something we all need to work on, because that openness and of fundamental research and the ability to share scientific information is critical, both domestically and through international collaborations.
Christina, is it okay if you answer the last question, that just the final question? There's a question about NIH. NIH has been extremely proactive in amplifying China initiative, and some of the decision principles are still there. Is there a review of what they have done? Have they learned a lesson from all of this?
Coming back to data-driven policy, we currently are in a moment of really trying to collect. So let me back up 1 second. Part of OSTP's role in implementing NSPM 33 and also now coming up in some of our policies and chips in science is to track how the policy implementation is going and to understand what the impacts are on the research community, to understand what's happening to our research enterprise. And so it's this logic that, for example, our colleagues at NSF are moving into bigger data analytics, and our colleagues at NIH too have been focused on analyzing data around who's applying, in what ways, where for, where how. So we're closely aligned. I mean, we're closely connected all the time to our federal research agencies. We were reviewing their data with them. We understand what the connections to the broader policy streams are. And in this case, I would appreciate, I would love if anyone wanted to send me a little bit more background on exactly the examples that you have in your mind. The data that I reviewed show fairly balanced outcomes. So I'd be very curious to understand more. We also have to, as scientists ourselves, realize that data don't always tell us the whole story. So thank you very much for bringing that up.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you so much for your comments and participation in our webinar. It's really my pleasure. Thank you all. Yeah, we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you. So Toby, and then there are some questions for our own colleagues at AASF as well. But Toby, there's a question about universities. You know, how because you work with, I think, if I remember correctly, 65 top research universities in the country, and so at MIT we have a group looking at this issue, but it will be much better if all of the universities can have a conversation about discussion and conversation about these issues. And so there's a question specifically for you, which is, you know, how do you work with universities to prevent any negative career implications for researchers, and how do you get universities to make sure that they don't punish people because of that?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and where part of this comes in is, I think, first of all, this has been a learning process for our research administrators, particularly the research VPs who are in charge of complying with federal rules. And as we've already talked about, and I think even Christina recognizes, some of the rules have changed along the way. So trying to push back and figure out how to engage the agencies in a dialogue to ensure that faculty are not being, punished unduly for honest mistakes. And we've talked, how are there ways that we can engage the government in a conversation about making sure that the rules are consistent in terms of how, and this is something really important in light of the China initiative going away. It doesn't mean that the agencies aren't going to still try and hold universities and individual faculty members accountable for what they're supposed to disclose. The issue is, how clear are those rules, and then how consistent are they from agency to agency? Most important, how consistency is it the process by which each agency, when there are mistakes, then acts upon those or works with the university to resolve those issues that are identified. So that's something we're going to engage and want to engage OSTP in. It's a very important part of NSPM 33, the developing kind of consistent rules and consequences for failure to disclose information. And like I say, I don't think those rules have at all been clear. So that's one of the things we're going to really focus on, and look forward to working with the Scholars Forum on that particular issue.
Okay, I'm going to invite Xihong and Yu to come in as well. There's a question in the comment box about, and I agree with the sentiment expressed there, which is that clarification of rules, better communication, that's very, very good. But it doesn't sound like a proactive enough, right? So are there more things that can be done that can be more proactive in repairing the damage, as your report has shown? It seems that it requires more than clarification of the rules. Xihong and Yu, I invite you to give your views.
Xihong, you want to speak first, or you want me to go first?
Go ahead, you go first.
I think we should recognize Americans' advantage in if there is a competition. We have openness, we have PI organized research infrastructure. Any junior faculty member with talent, with ideas, can apply for federal grants and conduct independent research without administrative oversight, without deans or president's approval. We have a flat research system. And though that flatness serves openness, and the flatness doesn't matter whether you're American citizen, whether you are born abroad, whether you're man, woman, your religion, your sexual orientation, your ethnicity, no matter who you are, but if you have good ideas and you can convince a funder to fund you, or if you, in some areas, research university to fund you, you can start out to compete with established authority, with established researchers, with Nobel laureates. This is a wonderful intellectual environment in the US. It should be attractive to lots of people, especially young people with ambitions and ideas, whether they're from China or elsewhere. I think that's an advantage of US system that has retained many talented researchers. Some of them are here. Kai Li is an example. He's a great computer scientist. He came from China, but he chose to stay in America and choose to contribute to science and technology, computer science in America. So this is a why, because this is openness. His college education was problematic. He knows that. He grew up during Cultural Revolution, and Chinese system has advantages too. Right now, it has more funding opportunities, has large labor force and young labor force to do lab work and so on. So China has advantage and uses advantage to attract scientific talent from the US. But US has its own advantage, particularly openness and flat research structure that should be attractive to young scholars. I think if we don't take advantage, capitalize on the advantages of the US, we will lose the competition through market forces, because China is offering good positions, research infrastructure, research fund. So I think we should not only avoid making mistakes like the China initiative, but we should actively capitalize on our advantage, our immigration policy, our, as I mentioned earlier, civil rights movement was a watershed moment in US history. It was one of many reasons why many people from China, from other countries, have been doing very well in the US. Asian Americans, in my view, Asian Americans are one of the biggest beneficiaries of civil rights movement. And equality for all means equality even for those who came from China, and so on, and doing science in the US. So that's one we should take an active role. The second thing I want to mention, Toby, about rules and applications, I think I agree with you. We should have transparency, we should have clarity, we should have fairness, and we should have all of those understanding. But one thing I'm not sure, I think NIH and some federal government probably have done not in a productive way, is to add more information on applications. Yeah, because you could have an endless list of things to ask, and that's not necessarily productive because individual situations are very different. You can say you serve with other members of editorial board, you can easily list 50 people. You list all your co-authors, you have 200 people. I think we should lay out clear rules, especially for punishment, but we should still don't necessarily ask individual scientists to provide endless amount of information. I think asking for more information is the wrong way to go. I think the right way to go is clarify what is allowed, what is not allowed, what would be considered just intellectual scientific dishonesty and fraud should be well defined. If people are knowing the rules, knowing what is wrongful and violates, and that's a willful violation, and the person should be punished according to law and regulations. I think the more attention should be placed on discovering of flaws and punishment of fraud cases instead of filing complicated filing from all applicants. I think because unlawful violations are few, and the effort could be placed on discovering of them and punishment. And also, I agree. Another thing is that we should train research vice president office staff so they communicate rules to faculty. I think the communication, what is lawful, what is not lawful, what is allowed, what is not allowed, intellectual integrity. I think education, both of staff and faculty, is a key. And then you can put emphasis. Federal government could put emphasis on discovery of flaws and prosecution of fraud cases instead of just collecting endless amounts of information from applicants. That seems to be unproductive. I will end here.
Xihong?
You summarized very well. I will be brief for the interest of time. And I think I feel in the last year, and the OSTP and federal agency and also university have really made a significant effort in clarifying the rules and also providing more detailed guidelines. I think that's really a significant improvement. And but it would be good to go beyond that to create a positive environment which make the Asian American faculty feel welcomed and comfortable. And so I think so right now, I think that type of outreach is still not there yet. And so that basically right now, yes, the faculty are asked to provide input on the rules, on the guidelines, on the disclosure information. And so this is more passive. So it would be nice to have more proactive activities and outreach activity, make the faculty feel more comfortable and feel appreciated, and especially junior faculty, because they are the future, because it really not good to see this large fraction of faculty who want to move are junior faculty. They are the future. So they are looking for an environment they can commit themselves to do research, don't worry about other things, and so make them feel welcome. So this will need to involve more outreach activity at the university level, at the organization level, and then there should be more forward-looking and productive conversations, and to see how to create a stimulating and safe environment, and then the Asian American faculty feel safe and comfortable.
So I think there's a simple way to do this, right? Which is to have a grandfather policy. The very fact that the federal government now is working to clarify rules means that the rules were not clear before, right? So when the rules were not clear, the violations of the rules were also not that straightforward. I mean, that's just common sense. So when you have a declarative sentence about grandfather treatment, you restore confidence instantaneously. And then the discussion is really about, yes, there may be some false positives, false negatives, right? But relative to the losses because of lack of confidence and the brain drain, those sort of false negative cases are not that important relative to the total benefits of restoring confidence. So I think that that should be the way to go. On that note, let me ask Xiaodong to take over the webinar because I have a hard stop at 4:15, and but let me end by thanking Toby for your perspectives, for reviews. Of course, I'm going to thank my colleagues at AASF, Yu and Xihong, for doing fantastic work and for presenting the data so clearly and such an important issue. Thank you very much. And thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Yashon, I'll be brief. Thank you for all the participants in the webinar with many excellent questions. At the peak time, I look at the number, more than 350 participants. And for those of you who could not attend, we will have a YouTube link available. There are also there are a long list of questions. There are excellent questions. Unfortunately, the panel was not able to answer them one by one, but we have collected all these questions and we're going to find another opportunity to answer them one by one. We're going to send to all the panelists of these questions. So let me make some comments about the webinar. The data analytics study was done by a multidisciplinary team of a sociologist, statistician, computer scientist, and even material scientist. Thank you, Yu and Xihong, for presenting the findings of your study. We also appreciate Christina and Toby's participation, who gave their policymaking perspective to the issues we discussed today. I think this is very important. Yashon has moderated the panel several times, and he always does excellent job. Thank you. Finally, we would like to thank Congresswoman Judy Chu to express her serious concern on the departure trend of Chinese descent scholars from US universities. Thank you again for all the participants, and we hope to see you next AAS webinar. Bye-bye.